What you're looking at is a painting that I have in my office, and it hangs on the wall. It's an old painting. I've had it for a long time. And I'm going to use it as my lesson illustrator today as I begin our lesson. It's a picture of a hockey rink. Every little town in Canada from coast to coast in the wintertime has one of these little hockey rinks. They're manned by volunteers. They look after them and keep an eye on them. What I have here is a painting that was given to me by a friend of mine. He painted it. His name is Bill Bromridge. He and I have something in common. He has a son that suffers schizophrenia. And life has left him out, and I have a son the same. Life has left him out as well. What we have here is a picture that Bill has painted depicting the theme, left out. Now you'll notice here the theme, this little guy here, he's got tears in his eyes, he's still got his skates, he's got his hockey stick beside him, and he's got his pal who's come with him, and there's the dog watching. It's the story of choosing up to play on the ice a game of hockey. You'll notice over here in the rink, they have the teams that are already chosen. There they have two captains, and they've picked out their team players. But these two little guys have been left out. And if you look carefully, this little fella here, the tears are in his eyes. He can't look back to see what's going on the ice. And there he sits in the shade on that wall of that hockey rink, and he can't play anymore. He was left out. Okay, with that introduction, I'm going to lead you into our lesson today because we've been studying the life of Elijah. Let me pick up the story for you. And I've entitled our lesson, Left Out. Because when I tell you the story, I think you'll catch the theme. We've been studying the life of Elijah in the Old Testament. He lived hundreds of years before Jesus. He was called the prophet of fire, and he lived during that reign of that wicked king Ahab and his wife Jezebel. Today's lesson is found in the 21st chapter of 1 Kings. Let me give you the setting. You're going to gaze in a room in the king's palace. Ahab, the king of Israel, is lying on the couch, and his face is towards the wall. And he's sulky. He's refusing to eat. Well, what's happening here? Has he faced another battle? He just came from that battle on Mount Carmel where he lost. Is that going on again? No, that's not what we're talking about. Well, maybe Jezebel, his wife, has died. No, she's still alive. She's going to show up in a minute. Well, has his nation been invaded? He's going to be losing his kingdom. No, that's not why he's sulking. Is there another famine coming? No rain? Drought again? All his animals and subjects are going to die? No. As a matter of fact, things are going very well. The worship of Baal has already been recovered. They've got some more false prophets. And Israel is back worshiping those idols. His soldiers have just returned from victory over their archenemy, the Syrians. The rains have come, the drought is over, the granaries are overflowing. Well, why is the king sulky? And he's not eating his meals? I'll read it for you. 1 Kings chapter 21, starting in verse 1. Naboth, the Jezreelite, he owned a vineyard in Jezreel, and that bordered on the palace of Ahab, the king of of Samaria. One day, Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, "Would you give me that vineyard so that I can use it sort of as a kitchen garden? It's right next to my house, so convenient. In exchange, I'll give you a far better vineyard. And if you don't want another vineyard, I'll pay you good cash for your land." But Naboth, he told Ahab the king, "Not in your life. So help me God, I'll never sell the family farm or my heirloom to you. Ahab, hearing that, went home in an ugly mood, sulking over Naboth's words, I'll never turn my family inheritance over to you. He went to bed, stuffed his face in a pillow, and he refused to eat. Standing by his side next to the couch was his wife Jezebel. Crafty, cruel, deceitful, but beautiful. Anxious to find the cause of his sadness, she says to him, "What's up? Why are you so out of sorts? No appetite? You haven't eaten a thing." Ahab tells his story. The little village of Jezreel was just a few miles from the royal palace in Samaria. The king's residence in Jezreel was really only a summer residence for the king for his summer retreat. And it was simply a pleasure ground away from the main palace. Naboth's vineyard was next door, and it was bordering on the king's property. Ahab's eyes, they lighted up when he saw that neighboring vineyard that belonged to Naboth. He saw it as a valuable addition to his own property, and he set out to get it at all costs. Now verse 6, 1 Kings 21. Ahab tells his story to Jezebel. "Because I spoke to Naboth, I said, 'Give me your vineyard. I'll pay you for it. And if you'd rather, I'll give you another vineyard in exchange.' And you know what he said? 'I'll never give you my vineyard.'" Now this story gets cute, but it also turns very ugly. Listen to Jezebel. Verse 7. "Is this any way for the king of Israel to act? Aren't you the boss? Why are you being such a crybaby? Get up on your feet. Eat. I want you to cheer up. I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to get the vineyard for you." Let me explain what's going on here. Real estate in ancient times was not dictated by man's law. It was dictated by the laws of Moses. Canaan, this land, was considered God's land. All of Israel belonged to God. The Israelites were tenants only. God divvied out all of his property to the 12 tribes of Israel, and they were all divvied out equally. The condition meant that the owner of his allotment was to be kept in his family from generation to generation, and they couldn't lose it. If for some reason they had a hardship, maybe someone died, maybe they had tragedy in their family, and a neighbor had to come and run it for them, but over time, it had to return to the original owner because it was given back in the year of Jubilee. That land transfer was coupled with this condition, that the land could be redeemed at any time by its original owner. But Naboth, he knew the king, and he knew the power that that king could possess. And if he received the land, he might not ever get it back. That's the power a king had in those days. In other words, he could lose his inheritance forever. His children would never again play in that vineyard that he owned. What Naboth was saying to Ahab, I'm saying no on religious grounds, The Lord forbids me to do it. I refuse. Naboth was saying, this is a religious act. He said no in obedience to God. That has nothing to do with the king requiring something because of his selfish need. Remember the Brown Witch painting that I just told you about? Naboth was that little boy with those tears in his eyes. His vineyard that he owned was his life's possession. He was on God's team. God chose him. He wasn't left off the team. Ahab wanted to steal it away. Naboth, he could no longer play in those grapes again with his children. And like that little hockey player with his stick and his skates still on, he wanted to play, but he couldn't play because they didn't choose him. Naboth wasn't chosen on the team of King Ahab. It was going to be taken away. Picture Naboth's loss. All his memories associated with that spot. I'm talking about the inheritance of his dad. Beneath those vines and those trees, his dad had sat for generations. Naboth spent his sunny years as a child in that vineyard. He couldn't sell the vineyard even if he wanted to. His children were alive, and they had to enjoy his memories too. If Elijah the prophet heard about it, I wonder what he would do. Well, we're going to come to that in a minute. Before we get there, though, watch what Jezebel does. That wicked woman. What I'm going to tell you is so evil, and it's so vicious. Verse 8, chapter 21, 1 Kings. She forged Ahab's signature. She fraudulently signed Ahab the king's name on personal documents. She wrote a letter over Ahab's signature, stamped with his official seal, and she sent it to City Hall in that little village of Jezreel. And the elders in that Naboth city, the civic leaders, here's what she wrote. Call for a fast day and put Naboth at the head of the table. Then set a couple of false witnesses across from him at the table in front of everybody and say this: Naboth blasphemed the king, and he also, in so doing, blasphemed God. When they hear that, they're going to throw him out, they're going to find him convicted, and they're going to stone him to death. Do you think that'll happen? The civic leaders surely can't be that stupid. Well, they are. Everybody knows Jezebel's reputation. She was cruel. She was as crooked as a barrel of snakes. Jezebel won. Watch what happens. Verse 14, 1 Kings 21. Naboth was dragged under complete fraud by that tribunal, hearing the lies of all those false witnesses. The sitting judge pronounced these words: Naboth, you have blasphemed God, and Naboth, you have blasphemed the king. No, he didn't. That's a complete lie. The company that arrested him and convicted him didn't see it that way. They threw him out on the street, and the Bible tells us in this story that they stoned him to death. Could this story get any more treacherous? Yep. Verse 15. When Jezebel got word that Naboth had been stoned to death, she told Ahab, now you can go for it. Ahab, take the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. You now own it. Naboth is no more. Naboth is dead. What does Ahab the king do? Verse 16. The minute Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, he set out for the vineyard and he claimed it for his own. He surely can't get away with that, can he? That witch Jezebel, his idolatrous wife, she doesn't have that kind of power, does she? Isn't God going to lower the boom? Doesn't he care? Keep your eye now on Elijah. He hasn't appeared in our story yet. Well, here he comes. Verse 17, 1 Kings 21. Then God stepped in and he spoke. Do you know we live in a wicked world? We've got leaders stealing other countries. We've got people stealing you. Have you ever felt you'd been in the midst of being a thief? Then God stepped in and he spoke to Elijah, get on your feet, old boy. I want you to go down and confront Ahab again, only this time in Samaria. He's the king of Israel. You're not going to find him in Samaria. You're going to find him in the vineyard of Naboth. He has gone there to claim it for his own. When you get there, I want you to follow these my instructions. Say this to Ahab. What's going on here? First you murder, and then you steal. Then I want you to tell him my verdict. The very spot where Naboth died on the street, being pummeled by the stones, you, Ahab, are going to die right behind him in the very same spot. Elijah went on, as for Jezebel, your wife, she's going to be thrown out of the window of the palace, and her body is going to be crushed on the stones that she falls on, and the dogs are going to come and lick her blood. God doesn't overlook the suffering of his children. And he doesn't overlook your pain either. None of Ahab's descendants ever entered the palace as a king or a prince. Listen to these words in verse 21. Elijah told Ahab, because you brought evil on your people and defied me, my God, I'm going to bring you down along with all your descendants, and I'm going to kill every male in your tribe, and you're not going to have one descendant ever come to be a prince or a king in Israel again. Verse 23, as for Jezebel, the dogs are going to fight over her body parts when she falls out the window and she spills her body there on the street. Picture what Elijah is doing here. Remember, he was scared of Jezebel. He ran away. They couldn't find him. He ran 80 miles. God told him as he found him hiding in a cave, I want you to go back. I want you to go back to the place where you fled. And there's something I want you to do for me. When you get to Naboth's vineyard, I'll tell you what I want you to do. Well, you just heard it. What does this lesson teach us? It doesn't matter what status in life you are. You could be a king. You could be a prime minister, a president of your nation. You could be a pauper. If you do evil and you think that you're going to get away with it, and when it's all over, you're going to prosper, I want you to think again. Naboth, the owner of this vineyard, he dies very quietly with the whole town watching. He dies by stoning. All the witnesses go home. They don't even feel sorry for him. The vineyard passes into the hands of Ahab and Jezebel. But God stood by, and he watched what happened, and they didn't get away with it. Here's what God wants you to do when you're confronted with somebody in a high position. You aren't selected to play anymore. You saw that in my painting that I just showed you. You've been left out. What's precious to you is going to be taken away. Did you notice what Naboth did? When he was confronted by the king, that person in high position, Naboth rebuked him. He said no. Ahab from his lofty position as king and Jezebel from her wicked evil being the accomplice, they thought they had the license to perpetrate evil. They didn't. Naboth rebuked them. He stood his ground, and that vineyard was his, and no one was going to take it away from him. What happened here with Naboth happens every day in our world. Acts of high-handed sin and treason, nations stealing another nation from another nation, countries trying to cyber attack our nation in business, and then big business, they steal a little guy. Wicked adults, they steal the minds of innocent children on social media. You out there that are listening to me that are school teachers can't do their job anymore in their classroom. We stand by and we watch it, and you seem helpless. Naboth just meekly dies. The vineyard passes into the oppressor's hand. Nothing could be more prosperous. He came, he saw, and he conquered. But there is one that sees what's going on. And he's not going to let you get away with it. God always avenges his servants. If you move ahead to 2 Kings chapter 9 and get to verse 26, listen to this. Surely, says God, I have seen yesterday the blood of Naboth. And thus saith the Lord, he will surely pay for his sins. Standing in that vineyard was Elijah, God's prophet. The criminal heart says, what are you doing here? Elijah responds as he pricks that conscience. I know what you've done. I know what you've done to that poor owner of that vineyard. You're not going to get away with it. Sin in the end never pays. Sin always seems to be successful. It's not. Be sure your sin will find you out. I want to close this lesson with some words from Jesus. He looks down and he sees that little boy with tears in his eyes because his spot on the team has been taken by somebody else and he's no longer needed. He was left out. He looked down and he saw Naboth losing his vineyard, his family heirloom, and his children's inheritance. He looks down upon you. Maybe you've lost your health. Maybe you've lost your inheritance. Could have been you lost your bank account. Somebody frauded you. Maybe you lost your mental intelligence. Whatever it was stolen away. And you're no longer part of the team. Watch what Jesus says about that. I'm talking about Matthew 5, starting in verse 12. It's the message that he gave on the Sermon on the Mount. Here's what he says. Blessed are you, Naboth, who lost your vineyard. Blessed are you, widow, who lost your husband. Blessed are you, little hockey player, who wasn't picked. Blessed are you, suffering schizophrenia, mental illness. You're left off the team. Blessed are you, nursing homes. You nursing ones. Nobody comes to visit you anymore. Blessed are all of you when men tear you down and they persecute you and they say all manner of evil against you. That isn't true. But you stood your ground for my sake. Rejoice. I want you to celebrate. I want you to put that smile back on your face. For great is your reward in heaven. Because you were true to me, I have already picked you to be on my team. That's my story. Naboth and the vineyard that's still his inheritance. See you next week.